Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I was looking for fun ways to tell you that Mint's offer of unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month is back. So I thought it would be fun if we made $15 bills. But it turns out that's very illegal. So there goes my big idea for the commercial. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
There's some incredible TV coming out of the UK right now. Brits just do it differently. The accents, the wit, the scenery, the devastating one-liners disguised as compliments. It's all streaming on BritBox. They have the best mysteries, dramas, comedies, and seriously addicting originals like Outrageous, based on the true story of the Mitford sisters. They were kind of like the Kardashians of the 1930s, wealthy, audacious, chaotic, wildly opinionated, and always making headlines. And chances are you've never heard their story. It's stunning. It's jaw-dropping. It's very British. So check out Outrageous. It could be your next favorite. Don't miss Outrageous, streaming now only on BritBox.
This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/Wondery.
It is tragic when a child has to, through no fault of their own, lose their parents, which is what happens through adoption. Lose their biological parents. I'm fully aware of that, and this is why I feel so sorry especially for the birth mother of our children. You know, this is it's tragic for the children. It's tragic for the mother. However, that does not override the circumstances from which they came. That it had to happen. It had to happen. It's like a surgical operation. It had to happen. There was no other choice.
That's Lane Igoodin, a writer, an activist, and professor of English and linguistics at Los Angeles City College. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. A few months ago, we explored adoption with Janet Sherland and her experience with the downsides of adoption. Today, we're going to look at adoption through a strikingly different lens, from the perspective of Lane Igoodin, a foster parent, adoptive father, and member of the LGBTQ+ community. Lane recently wrote a book, A Father, Maybe, a candid memoir that shows the human side of adoption as Lane and his partner Jonathan attempt to adopt their foster daughters from the Los Angeles County, California child welfare system. Born to a teenage mother, the girls settle in with their new family, only for it to quickly turn into an uphill battle to keep their new family together. Lane walks readers through the complicated process that ends up, in his case, involving family court hearings, visits with birth parents, and an assortment of other moments. But that just captures some of the complexities of Lane's life. Lane and his husband, both are LGBTQ+, at a time where in the not-so-distant past, gay, lesbian, and other same-sex couples could not adopt children in many states. In addition to that, Lane is Russian and Jewish, and his husband is African-American, and the girls are Hispanic and mixed race, layering cultural complexity on top of all of it. Lane's story has caught the attention of psychologists, social workers, politicians, and others, and he's been featured in a wide variety of television programs and print and online publications. Today, we're going to discuss adopting children from foster care, the challenges of navigating intersectionality in the world, the balancing act between the rights of parents and what's best for children, and love under pressure as you fight to keep your family together. So, Lane, I wanted to thank you for joining me and tell you the story about how I, tripped across your book. Actually, it came from a friend of mine at work who came up to me and said, "Hey, Jason, I think we have found the meld of many of the topics that you're really interested in." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, sure." Um, and they told me a little bit about your book, and I sort of, my jaw dropped in a lot of ways because I think I don't run into a lot of people who are talking about adoption from the perspective of adopting someone. So that's one thing. I don't run into a lot of people who are adopting in the foster system in the United States as opposed to using international adoptions on this. Then on top of that, you being LGBTQ plus as another layer to it, being an interracial couple married to a man who's Black. And I was like, wow, like the intersectionality of a lot of different topics that I am interested in are here. And I was really impressed in reading the book and then also reading some articles that you had written, how you've been able to acknowledge the difficulties of many of these things and discuss navigating them, and also be sort of like vulnerable about where you feel like things were successful and where you sort of felt like you were short. So I just thought to myself, so many of these very interesting, important issues for people.
Thank you for that, Jason.
Yeah.
I'm really glad to be on your show, and I didn't know that this is how you found my book. I'm like,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just happy to hear that it's actually making rounds and people pass it on from one person to the next. So yeah, made my day.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. I appreciate that. And one of the things, and I think you probably have an inkling of this. I did some reading on some of your writing, and you are, at least in my mind, you're an exceptional writer. But one of the things that I noticed about your writing, and there's this concept of being a really good writer, technically being good at the craft of writing. But I could tell you're a very, very good thinker. And one of the things that both in the book and your other writing really stuck out to me was your ability to clearly communicate complex ideas about emotions and complex ideas about thought, and leave. And I don't know if this is your goal, but and to leave, I think, the reader with some profound things to think about and not simple answers. And I'm wondering if that's intentional on your part. I kind of think of it like an artist who paints a painting that has a meaning for them, but lets the rest of us go find our own powerful message through it.
When it comes to writing a memoir, I think to me a better metaphor than an artist would be a sculptor. That, basically you look at your life, or even at a particular period in your life, as a sort of a block of marble, and you are cutting away. You're not really creating something; you're just cutting away things that do not really belong to the story, so that then the story really comes to the front. So you can really see the story in
three dimensions. Yeah.
Yeah. And here it's really the story. It's really the story that really drove me to write the book. I usually say this is a book I never planned to write, but it's really the story that began to develop as we went into the foster adoption process and things began to go wrong. So, and the further we got, the more wrong they got. And I realized that there's nothing really been written about it. And if I could find a narrative like this, I would have been able to learn from it, and maybe, and so I thought I should write it down, I should document it, and then whatever the outcome is, whatever the end is at the end of this tunnel, whether we'll survive as a family or split up or whatever happens, I have to tell it. So because I couldn't find anything quite like this.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's how this book began.
Oh, that's interesting. So you actually began sort of reporting and documenting the story
Mhm.
before you even knew the outcome, and that probably also makes it a little part of the reason why it's so riveting and detail oriented is or not detail oriented, but has such vivid details in it. You were doing it in real time. So,
Yes, I was documenting. I was documenting in that I was keeping a diary. I was saving all the faxes and court orders, whatever was coming in. I have hundreds of emails, but I was putting them aside. So thinking that, okay, once we get to the end of it, I'll sit down and write about it. And we reached the end about 3 years later, and I couldn't write about it. It was just too raw. It was too, it was a little too PTSD for me to like. I didn't want to like those wounds were like very raw still. Last thing I wanted to do was just go back and dig in and so I couldn't write about it. I actually I couldn't touch any of this for about 4 years until after the adoptions were finalized, and then I began to sort of cautiously get into the files and see what I could do with it, how I could actually put it in a coherent narrative that will tell the reader about the whole journey, the whole experience of it.
yeah. And that was probably wise because I know it was probably hard for you to go back. But I think there's something to be said when writing about one's own life and the people who are closest to you of having some perspective, some motion and time away from the bulk of the story. I was talking recently to Gilbert King, who's the podcast host of Bone Valley, and he's a Pulitzer winner. He's the author of Devil in a Grove. And a lot of his stories, have to do with, race or injustice in 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 the South. But one of the interesting things we were talking about is he a true crime podcast host? And he said, like I get you in with the crime, but he's really telling love stories about the relationship, the people who are willing to fight for different people. Like in one of his stories, underneath the ruthless sun, there's this journalist who's willing to fight for this disabled kid who's wrongfully accused, and these powerful stories. In many ways are about love. And one of the things that I thought when I read your book as I walked away with something that I think applies to anyone, regardless of whether they're going through adoption or they're dealing with the particular struggles that you did. But it was really a story about love under pressure in my mind. And yeah, I was wondering what your thoughts on that were.
Well, I think the story of our family began with love. I mean, and not with the kids. It was actually the love between me and my partner, now husband, Jonathan, because it was our joint decision to go into the system and to adopt one or two children. And so our family is a direct product of our relationship, our love, our commitment to each other. And when I talk about it today, I always remind my my audience, my listeners, my readers is that this is where it began, and that's where it should be at the end of the process too. Because this relationship between you and your partner is central. That's the foundation of the family. That's the foundation of the family. So you should never take them for granted. You should never assume they'll pull in your. No, you have to honor them, respect them, and that needs to be there when all this is done, because this is, no matter what parenting will push you through, and it'll push you through a lot, you must do all you can to stay together. Because I've seen families that are split by the uncertainties of the adoption process, by power struggles over parenting strategies. I've seen people belittle and undermine each other, and in the end, they grow apart or split up. So I would say, always keep an eye on your partner. Love them more, give them more, never take them for granted.
Yeah, and I think that's probably, interestingly, as I'm sitting here thinking about it, that is like a great piece of parenting advice, period. Because I think so many couples struggle once they have children. And they actually the process of having children and the way they manage it sometimes pull them away from each other. But as you were saying it, I was just thinking to me, how could you truly love your children if you don't love yourself and love your partner?
I,
Like,
to
yeah.
me, and I can only speak like for myself, it is different. Of course, I mean, and in some ways, those relationships, those affections may come into conflict. And you read my book, it actually, there are some moments in the story when I'm like, oh my God, will I have to choose between my kids and my partner? So it's all very, very real. But what I think people, and I speak from my own experience, may become a little bit afraid to put out more affection, to give more, and expect to receive more. Whereas if you really want this to succeed, if you really want your family to succeed, you really have to give more and love more. You know what I mean? Like, instead
Mm.
of trying to receive it and expect it, give it away. Give it away, and hope that it will keep your family together.
Yeah, I had there was a medical doctor who also happened to be a lieutenant general in the army, and he once said something to me that really stuck in my head. Simple but profound. A guy named Ron Place, really brilliant guy who's out in South Dakota running a healthcare system now. But he said that so many times in life, and he was talking to his whole leadership team, and I happened to be there. And
Mhm.
he was saying so many times in life, we expect other people to give us respect, and we expect other people to earn it. And it's always stuck in my mind too, with this notion of love, right? That if you have two people, just like respect, if you have two people who are saying to themselves every day, I'm going to love you more than I'm going to love you more today than yesterday, more than you could possibly love me, then you get this ideal situation filled with love. But it made me think, going back to what you said before, what was it like in those moments where you were thinking to yourself, am I going to have to choose between my kids and my partner? And how did you navigate that?
It was hard. It was hard. There's a moment in the book, for example, when the social worker is telling us that our younger daughter, who was a newborn, as you know, when she came to our house, will be taken out of our home and placed with her birth father, whom she really doesn't know, and who has a very spectacular, shall I say, criminal history. Um, and so what she's telling us is about to rip our family apart. And the chapters, actually, I can actually read a little bit if you like, just from that particular chapter. Although that's not the chapter I usually read, but I'll read from this one. So and so it had to come to this. Let it be known that on this 24th day of October, I, Lane Igoodin, give Playtime Learning Children's Center and Preschool 2 weeks notice of withdrawal of my daughter Gabriella from the program. My child's last day will be November 4th. The notice of withdrawal ended with, quote, "Thank you and best wishes towards your child's future!" Exclamation point. A topical mismatch between the sender and the recipient of the form. We were losing Gabby. Jackie had called to confirm that, as she told me earlier, the judge was going to order the release of the child to Tony at the upcoming hearing in 2 days. Start getting ready, Lane. Notify your daycare. Things are going to start moving quickly now. But is she moving into a safe place? We know so little about him. What's his history? And who's going to take care of Gabby once she moves in? Doesn't he even work? His relatives don't seem all that excited about taking her in. I know he's not perfect, but he is her father. And trust me, Tony's family is behind him all the way. They've got his back.
And Tony is the
Is the
father.
biological father of the younger child.
Yeah. And that's Gabby's
And yeah, and
father.
so basically, um,
And Jackie was your
Jackie. Yeah, I'm sorry. Jackie is the social worker, and Tony's the
social worker,
biological
right?
dad. So trying to absorb this news, I recalled the story that my grandmother, Babushka, had told me. When her baby daughter, her only child besides my father, died at 6 months of dysentery, her first thought was not of sorrow. Grandmother wondered how to break the news to my grandfather, how to handle it in a way that wouldn't estrange him, that would, in the aftermath of the child's death, keep their relationship intact, their family together. I too had to protect John as much as possible. I didn't see how he could function. Get up in the morning, go to work, take care of Mariana, Gabby's older sister, of himself, waiting for the baby growing up like a flower blooming on his chest to be taken away.
Mm.
So the daycare withdrawal form will remain a secret for now, I decided. I'll tell him nothing until we get the official court order.
Mm.
I handed the notice to Estella, the Playtime Learning Director. She already knew why Gabby was leaving. Estella didn't ask me if I was okay. She didn't convey empty wishes like, oh, let's hope things will work out for you, little Gabby, to bring our uncomfortable transaction to a smooth end. She just looked at me like she understood what I was going through, and that was enough.
Right.
I stared back. No, it wasn't over. I wasn't giving up.
She knew, and you knew what she meant. I was going to ask you just a little bit about, so you make the decision collectively to adopt as parents. You're a same-sex couple, adopting as parents. Also an interracial couple adopting as parents. But a lot of people who adopt in the United States will often look for international adoptions.
Right.
And will say that international adoptions sometimes can be easier than adopting from their own communities. And one of the feelings I got in your book, or not, I mean, I think it was pretty explicit, that you were very intentional about wanting to adopt from your community. And I'm curious about that decision making.
And by community, you mean geographically?
Geographic community. Yep. Yeah.
The other types of communities that
Correct.
we're members of.
Yes, right.
Well, even then, and we're talking about early 2000s, there were multiple paths to parenting that were available to us. You mentioned international adoption. There's also private adoption when a lawyer arranges for a woman who is pregnant and who wants to place her baby. She's planning to have a child, but isn't intending to raise that child. So a lawyer finds a family for her to place a child with that she'll be comfortable with. So that was also available. Surrogacy was already available too, and we could have afforded it because we were both, working professionals. So, but we wanted to do foster adoption exactly because we thought of that as a little bit more than just adding 2 children to our household, 1 or 2. We live in Los Angeles County, which has the largest foster care system in the country. At that time, there were over 30,000 kids in Los Angeles County alone, which was a quarter of all foster kids in California, and a large chunk of almost of 500,000 of foster kids in the United States. And so we're very much aware of that. And so we wanted to open our home to 1 or 2 children from our community, as you said, and give them a future. So there was this whole there was definitely an altruistic aspect to this, and I'm not in any way ashamed of it. Yes, we wanted to give 2 children a home, which they didn't have, and so to us that was important. And in that sense, by the way, that situation hasn't changed. Los Angeles still has a very large foster system, and there's still 368,000 kids in foster care today.
Wow.
So yeah, those issues aren't going away.
Yeah, no, not at all. The so it was very intentional and, like you said, altruistic choice to pick that path. And when I talk about community, like I said, geographic, but I think even geographic community, it's so much. It's a very it's something deeper than that, right? It's and I think it's interesting that you pick that choice,
Yeah.
because
Jason,
yeah,
sorry I interrupt you for a second, but I want to throw this at you.
okay,
When you adopt, the child is conceived not in bed, but in your mind.
mm,
Okay. So with us, we had this whole sort of gestation process that went on for a while until we reached the point where we're pregnant without idea.
yeah, yeah,
It couldn't have been more intentional. This was definitely not an accidental
right,
child
yes.
coming into our life or two.
And in that path. Well, I'm one thing I'm curious about is, going in and, you mentioned you guys really think about it for a long time before you get there. But I imagine a process like this, you can never think of all the things that could potentially happen. So one, I'm curious about, what surprised you about the journey, what you encountered along the journey.
Hmm.
And also, and I think you do an excellent job of exploring this in the book. There's this quote I've heard before, which just basically goes like, virtue isn't virtue until it's been tested or tempted. And that concept, the underlying idea, is that virtue doesn't really exist without vice, and without the temptation for vice, does virtue really matter? I have this conversation with one of my colleagues all the time about resilience. She says, I'm very resilient. And I said, well, I don't experience a lot of anxiety, so I'm not sure my resilience is all that exceptional. Yours is exceptional because you're filled with anxiety every day and you get back up. But in that concept, right? People talk a lot about love, but what I see in your story that stuck out to me was love between you and Jonathan that stood enormous tests. Love for those girls that there were so many moments where you could have walked away, where you could have given up.
And some of our friends did.
Yeah.
Some of our friends actually, and I think I do mention in the book, would send the kids back to the foster system because they couldn't deal with it because they knew there was no predictable end in sight.
Yeah. And so what was that journey like to adopt the girls and try to keep the family together? Yeah.
Well, the thing is, we went into the public adoption system, as you know, and in the largest one, at that in the country. And what we didn't know is that it's a very complex process legally, with so many parties involved in the child's present and future. We're talking about birth families, social workers, court-appointed attorneys, and the judge, and everyone's needs, responsibilities, and I would say alliances fluctuate, which makes the outcome highly unpredictable, highly uncertain. So just to give you some, some examples of that, and there's some of the uncertainties that we met along the way, right? So the birth parent may or may not have the ability to parent the child. A known or previously unknown biological relative could step forward to claim the child and get the preference over you. You may discover that the child has deeper psychological needs because of the trauma from previous placements. And then the child's attorney, social workers, that you've grown to rely on, that know the case, may suddenly disappear or be replaced by a new person who knows nothing about the case. So all of these things came in. And then when I'm talking about personal prejudices, biases, they affect the case a lot too.
Tell me about that.
Well, in our case, we dealt with a judge who was deeply committed to family reunification.
Mm-hmm.
And you read the book, you know what the family is, who the biological,
the mother struggled.
And
she was a teenager.
all of that. And if anything, if I were if I were in in that sort of position, I would really try to look out for the best of the mother in the sense that what can you do for the mother to build her up and
Yep.
help her become independent and be able to take care of herself, before even talking about any babies. Okay. But
Right.
that was not the case. So we had that, and so that personal bias and preference resulted in us being kept out of the process and literally thrown out of the courtroom when we tried to go in and ask for the de facto parent status. And that I do describe pretty in all the detail. So that's one bias. Or let's say the two social workers. The first one was neutral towards us. And so she kept, and she was really, she had so many cases so she was doing what she thought would be the best for the kids, although we would often disagree, but still.
And when you say neutral, do you mean ambivalence?
No, I would say neutral towards us as being a gay couple raising the kids. That I should have made it clear.
Yeah.
The second one, which thankfully came on pretty late in the process, was homophobic. And we felt that vibe from the first time we saw her. And so nothing was ever said. Nothing was ever said or written down in, to to put your finger on it, but it was there in the attitudes, in the coldnesses, in the, it was there. And that was,
it's that idea that, like I describe this feeling to people, my partner, we're in a race relationship together for a long time. I grew up in the South. She didn't grow up in the South.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember this trip down to South Carolina, and we were parking lot, and this guy in the parking lot of the grocery store looked at us, and she was like, "Oh, that's what you're talking about." And I'm like, "Yes." That man just told you a lot about what he feels with one side eye look. And I think unless you've been on the other side of that, you mentioned homophobia,
right.
I think, you can sense it in people's behaviors. It comes out in other ways. It's not, socially appropriate in probably, I'm guessing, the Los Angeles Human Services world, but you can feel it and something's different. And you see the way the person interacts with other people versus you. And
Yep. Yeah. And honestly, still, if you see a black man and a white man walking together, you would assume things, right? And in our case, you would assume correctly. But if you see a tall black man and a tall white man, walking together with two Hispanic girls next to them, heads would turn.
Yeah, no. I mean, I literally.
And some people be like, "Oh, that's interesting." I was like, "Oh, yeah." And others will give you looks, and you just kind of get used to it. You take it in stride. It's like, hey, I don't have a problem with myself. You clearly do, but that's your problem, right?
I'm guilty of this myself. So there was an Indian couple going through my grocery store recently, and there was a blonde, white-haired, like teenager with them. And, my thought crossed my mind because there were some other little kids there. And when little kids are running around their own in a grocery store or a parking lot or anywhere, I tend to look at the kids and then try to find the adult that they're with. And so then there's this teenager blonde girl and these little kids who look Indian and this Indian couple. And, we run into each other again in the grocery store, and I just see the way the blonde white girl is interacting with them. And I'm like, that is so familiar. Like they are family. And she literally says to me, "Yes, I'm adopted."
Yeah.
I hadn't even said anything.
Yeah.
It was so, but yeah.
No, people make assumptions, and that's perfectly fine. People make assumptions, right? But what's not fine is when you act with any sort of discrimination based on
those assumptions.
Yeah. It's okay that you assume, oh yeah, well, they're probably that's probably a gay couple with two adopted kids. Or if you see Jonathan with our younger daughter, oh, that's probably his daughter from a biracial marriage. Interracial marriage, whatever. You can assume. The thing is, how are you going to treat that person because of your assumptions? I think that's where it comes in.
Absolutely. So the only time I've really run into that situation, white man white man, black man, as a black man, was literally, I was driving in New York City with a friend of mine. We pull over, and a guy walks up to our window and he's like, "How are you guys doing, officers?" We're like, "What do you mean we're cops?" He's like, "You're either gay or you're cops." I was like, "Sorry, man, we're reporters." But it's funny how, like, so, and I find those moments interesting, but it's interesting to me.
You know what I find funny about this is that
What?
either you can be gay or cops, but not both.
Right. Yes. Right. We could have been gay cops. That's true. Right? We could have been gay cops. Right. Right. But not both. But the interesting thing about it is that when you think of something like adoption, you would think it's a very rules based system, right? It's got lots of rules, and we tend to think that rules create fairness, and it's best interest of the child is what you're often talking about. But within those rules, there is a lot of latitude and power.
Oh my God!
For a lot of different parties.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that piece of it.
Which makes the result, I'll tell you, it makes the result very much a lottery.
Yeah, luck.
And it's a very sad lottery overall, because what at stake is children's lives. Before even our life as a family, before my personal life, as an adult, but it's children's lives that are at stake, because with so many players in the process, with all these multiple agendas, because like, I would say, if we're talking about, in the court, you have the judge, the county council who represents the county and then wants to make sure the county doesn't get sued. That's their job, right? You have parents with their attorneys. You have children's attorneys. Of all of the parties that I've listed so far, and which, by the way, excludes us, of all the parties I've listed so far, only the birth parents were the ones who actually ever met the children.
Oh, wow.
No one else actually ever met our children. To everyone else making decisions about the children that we were raising, they were just another folder in a stack.
Wow.
Okay. And this is the reality. So all of that, the law says this and that, and there's a lot of room for how to deal with this. And then my book shows that, by the way, how the judge can really kind of twist the law or use it in such a way that kind of makes it around counter to its original intent. But the fact that of all these people that I mentioned making decisions jointly about the children that we are raising, there are only two would actually ever know them as human beings. I think that's unacceptable. It's just unacceptable.
And one of the things for me too that I have to step back and think about is, it was only in 2000, I think 16. I think it was 2016 that
the Supreme Court.
District court struck down, I think it was Mississippi's ban on same-sex couple adoptions. And then the next year, the Supreme Court consolidated that and an Arkansas case to address the issue. That it's not that long ago.
It's not that long ago, and things they may very well go back to the way they were, because so much depends on the composition of the court and their biases and their politics. So whether, if it goes back to the Supreme Court and they decide to treat the, same-sex marriage the way they treated abortion, meaning leaving it up to the individual states to decide, then we'll be exactly where we were 20, 25 years ago.
Yeah, which is a frightening concept. And one of the things that I think probably plays a role in that was something else that I wanted to ask you about. The idea that the court, based on its views, could turn things like same-sex marriage and things like, I think marriage would be harder because, people are already married. And you've got to have the reciprocity between states. But they could turn adoption back. But there's also this other element that you kind of hit on before when you were talking about the judge. If the court has a bias, for example, and I'm not saying that they do, but I could see why some people would wonder for preserving the family and reunifying families. If you combine those factors together, I think you could have a lot of things push in the opposite direction of where we are right now.
What's interesting is that the laws that are already in place are in some ways much wiser than what's really happening in the courtroom, because there's a federal law which passed in 1996 called ASFA Act, ASFA, families, I think. Anyways, so that law set in place this mechanism where basically if the child is taken into the system, into the foster care system, there should be a two-pronged approach to what to do with the child. Number one is return it to the birth family. That's the reunification, and the other track is what they call the concurrent planning. And concurrent planning means whether to keep the child in foster care, whether to send the child for adoption. So the thing is, from the moment that the court detains the child, there should be really two possibilities on which to work on. But what's really happening, as my book shows, is that the court is entirely focused on just one track, whereas the other track, which was us, foster adoptive parents, are sort of invisible. We're treated as less than, unwanted, not even discussed, and so we kind of kept out of it. And what I advocate,
it was almost like you were the choice of
totally,
last resort.
Yeah, last resort. Well, we are the ones who are actually raising the children. We're the ones the children know as their parents. We're the ones that they rely on 24/7. Like I said, week after week, month after month, year after year. So it was exactly the sort of discrimination in the way we were treated that really, I think, drove me also in part to tell the story, saying, hey, what do you consider to be a family? What do you consider to be a family? It's sort of a pie in the sky idea of it would be great if these particular people would be able to parent these particular children, or the family that's actually raising the children, that the children know as their parents. So how can you possibly, treat us so differently, so disrespectfully, so that was really shocking to me. And that attitude, by the way, I don't think it's changed at all. I think in some ways it's gotten even stronger. Basically, reunification above all. But where are you starting with that? Are you starting with birth parents and their rights, or are you starting with what's best for the children, which should be at the beginning of it, right? Which should be the core of the case.
Yeah, because you're trying to weigh and balance these things, but you would think in your head, courts are going to be focused on what's best for the children because that's what we constantly hear. You hear it in divorce proceedings, you hear it in, all sorts of family court type settings. But I also see merit in the concept of reunification, and there are all sorts of factors that play a role. How young was the child when they were adopted? How much time did they spend with their parents before they went into something like foster care? There are all these factors.
Well,
but
I would say that every time you get two different goals there, you'll get the tension between them.
And that's exactly what I was going to ask you about. How would you recommend solving for and balancing that tension? Because there are obviously clearly cases, and I think probably the mother of your daughters probably fits into this bucket. This person is not ready to raise a child. They're somewhat, in my mind, they feel more black and white. But how do you solve for that? What would be, if you were to offer sort of your Solomonic wisdom for judges and other people in the system, how do you solve for that?
Start with the child. I would say you have to start with the child over the rights of the parents. Ideally, all of us want biological children to go to their biological families. That's great, but that's exactly the assumption I think we should step back from and look at the situation at hand. Where would it be best for the child to be? Where would be safer for the child to be? How long are you're going to prolong this process of evaluation while the child is growing up. In the life of a baby or a 1-year-old, a week is like a month. Those attachments form, and and the child is growing, developing, and in the meantime, you're still deciding how many more months, how many more years. And if you reach that decision at that point, is that the same people that we knew? I mean, the child is definitely not the child that it was 1 or 2 or 3 years ago, and is it really the best time to do this? So I think it all needs to start with a child. And this, by the way, I would say it's not just kind of sort of like I can't really put any sort of left or right or centrist idea on it. I think this is the idea that really cuts across the entire spectrum of society. Are we starting with a child, not with a adult, but with a child when we think about the best future for them? And I think that was the intention of the law, which set up this 2-track process in place. Mm-hmm.
One of the things, and I get that philosophy, and I embrace that idea, because children, unlike adults, do not have the same sort of resources, defenses, opportunities. They hold a special place, and I kind of want them in the best home that they could possibly be in. There are probably some exceptions in my mind. I think one exception, if all things considered, you have a great home and then you have a really good home, I think something like the Indian Child Welfare Act makes a lot of sense, because, it's meant to make sure Native children end up, with parents in their own tribe or other Native tribes first, and then gives them access. That is designed to stop genocide. So I can see that there are exceptions to the general rule, but it makes me think of one other piece of it that I think is kind of interesting, given your background. Some of what you've written about is the importance of your family history.
Right.
And one of the things that people lose during the adoption process, in addition to sort of like, depending on the relationship with the birth family, you don't have the medical history, you don't have stuff like that. You don't know the family history, the intergenerational trauma that we now know is passed down through DNA, and also the cultural piece of it. And I thought it was just because you've written about this even outside of your book, the importance of these things. And, you tell the story of finding a relative, a cousin on Ancestry.com. And I think you wrote about
just a cousin, a whole, and then
it branched into this giant set of family members.
Yeah.
And there's
not that far removed, by the way.
Yeah,
not far removed at all.
Right, and you guys were, your common connection is the Ukraine, and there's a rich history around that. And you talk about meeting in Israel, and not just, like noticing the familiar sort of movements that you saw in other people in your family. And there's something there that's real
and
that's
intangible
important for us. Yeah, and intangible. And so for kids who are adopted, do they lose that? Are they building something new? Are they being incorporated? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts, okay, well, what I think is that we can't really say that it's not important. Of course it's important. It's tragic. It is tragic when a child has to, through no fault of their own, lose their parents, which is what happens through adoption. Lose their biological parents. I'm fully aware of that, and this is why I feel so sorry especially for the birth mother of our children. This is it's tragic for the children. It's tragic for the mother. However, that does not override the circumstances from which they came. That it had to happen. It had to happen. It's like a surgical operation. It had to happen. There was no other choice. That parent could not raise those children. So what happened in our case, ours is a close adoption. And the way I view it, it's exactly because their familial roots, their roots with the biological family were cut, and not by me, by the court system, that it's so important to, I use the metaphor of, it's so important to graft them onto the family trees of us, meaning of Jonathan and of me. Jonathan is African American. I'm Jewish. I'm Russian Jewish. So for them to feel that the communities they know they're adopted. They've always known they're adopted. But the fact that the communities that they came into welcome them, embrace them, and they will be there for them. So I think we've done quite a bit to do that. We also try to expose them to the best way we could to their Hispanic heritage. With bilingual caretakers. Summer camps. The Museum of Latin American Art. All those things. We have, and so if they want to go deeper into their heritage, at least they have certain basics that they already know. But I really wanted them to feel we wanted them to feel welcome, and I think we've done that the best we could as well. And what's interesting about this also is that I gave a talk last week, which was at Los Angeles City College where I teach, and there was about 250 faculty and students. And I told them, I said, this is some people might think, oh, that's such a kind of a unusual, family out there on the outliers and the fringes. I'm like, no, this is a very basic LA story, right? My partner is African American. I'm an immigrant. Our children are Hispanic. How more LA can you get?
Yes, I was about to say, you could be the poster children for LA.
No.
You're just bringing all of LA into the same house.
Yeah, and I, in a way, I'll take that in a way. And I think because Jonathan and I are really kind of the children of the 1990s, where this whole idea of a global village, multicultural families, multiculturalism was so embraced. To me, it's wonderful that we're bringing all these cultures into one family, because on one hand, I think it exposes our kids to so much more. It also teaches them respect and honor other cultures.
Yes.
But I also think that in interaction, we are producing something new, something really interesting, something very vibrant.
Yeah, and I think as a fellow child of the 90s, Global Village, United Colors of Benetton, the whole the whole works of it.
I remember those ads.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they were wild. But one of the things that I think people struggle with sometimes on that topic in general is I think they equate, and I don't think they'd ever word it like this, but essentially, they'll equate sometimes integration with erasure. And I think what you're saying, and tell me if I'm hearing you right here, you're saying that it's not about erasing any culture or doing anything. It's about embracing all the cultures. And one of the beauties I find about that, because, it's I love that kind of thinking. The beauties I find about that is sometimes you, as the, Russian American Jew, learning about the Hispanic culture, then begin to embrace a part of that culture.
I very much do, yeah. And to be honest, in some ways, I'm more excited about it than my kids are.
Yes, lots to learn.
Do we have to go to that Day of the Dead walk? Oh, yes, you are. We're going to paint your face too, and yes, we'll walk with Candelares. Yeah, I'm all for it. Okay, if you say so.
And that's, to me, I think it's a wise piece of advice for families in general, period, regardless of where you're from, because we're all blended in some way, right? Just by picking a partner outside of our own family, we're all blended in some way. But I think it's a wise piece of advice for people to just embrace other cultures and find other cultures and embrace them.
I think I see my role as a parent to I see my role as a parent when it comes to cultures is to expose my children to the point that now they're adults. They're free to make their own decisions, which culture they affiliate with more or less, or go on their own journeys, like we did, right? But if I think if I don't do that as a parent, if I say, oh no, you just we're just going to keep you in that particular little corner. I'm like, okay, well, that's really not who you are, and that's really not the family you're in. So let's just be realistic, and I'd like you to explore all these different parts of it, and see what in the end, when you're an adult, really rings true to you.
So jumping back like 30 or 40 years
Mhm.
ago, when a lot of adoptions were quite closed, obviously foster care system's slightly different, but were quite closed. There was a reluctance to like reuniting adopted kids with their families once they were adopted. And I think we've kind of gone in the opposite direction to some extent now, not entirely, but been more open to it. But I'm wondering, like, as a parent, so during this whole process and in this story, you're afraid the system is going to take your kids away from you and give them to people that you think are not ready and perhaps dangerous
Yes.
to some
Yes.
extent. And that's got to be frightening. The idea of your kids being taken away, or
And by the
any
way, I
kids,
did I did
really.
not suppose it, like, just because of, their birth parents, the Musbies. No, I didn't, because you can see it that when the birth father of our younger child, comes, at first we don't know much about him, and the front that he puts up actually looks quite, very well established, right? So we think that, okay, well, yes, we will, but at least, it'll be hard on us and on her sister,
Mm-hmm.
but at least, there's something real there, and there's the, and that's a biological parent and the family, and they're all behind them. Of course, all of that falls apart as you continue further down the book. But at the beginning, like, okay, well, at least, that's, it makes sense. It makes sense. So yeah, I'm not against it by default. No, it just, but there are situations like what I'm describing in the book where it's just not possible. And look how you're gambling with the life of a child when you just go by those assumptions, closing your eyes into really what's going on there.
Right, and getting below the surface. Was there a point ever later, as the girls got older, that through their curiosity or other factors that or even now, that you worry that
I'm not
they'll
worried.
become
I'm not
ensconced?
worried, and
Okay.
it's their right to go to the county and request to see their files and then reconnect. If that's what they want to do, it's their right to do so. I'm not. I mean, I have my own personal opinion about it, but it's their lives, and it's their decisions now that they're adults. Um, what we did is we tried to open their story to our kids as much as we could based on their age. You can
Mm.
tell a 5-year-old, something, and when they get to be 7 or 10, you can tell them a bit more. So what we would have told our kids when they were small, than we did, was that, that your mommy loves you, but she can't take care of you, so we've been taking care of you. I mean, that's the beginning, and of course then the details begin to emerge as they get older. So there was never any secret about where they came from and why they're with us, but it's like you just have to be strategic about what you can tell them at any particular age. So by the time the book was published, I think we pretty much knew most of the things that are in it.
Yeah, and so it's this
I mean,
concept.
without getting into too many, details, but they knew, they knew. What's interesting is when the book got published, because they didn't really read the draft, but when the book got published, they had very different reactions to it.
Well, I was going to ask you about those reactions,
Yeah.
what they were.
Well, our older daughter, who, as you know, was already in the foster system before she came to us, and she was traumatized by it, right? So she read the book overnight. She
Oh,
read the
wow.
book overnight, and she called us in the morning, crying and thanking us and all these things. And I told my partner, I said, John, I said, just give her a few days, and that'll really kind of catch up with her. And it did, because basically what the book did is kind of brought up a lot of things that she knew and she might have remembered, but they kind of set, like, kind of deep inside of her. And now brought them up to,
Crystallize.
yeah. So then we had a very different conversation. We went on for about 2 hours. It was very emotional, but at the end of it, I think it has been helping her to reconcile with a lot of those things, which were, like I said, sort of buried, below the surface.
Mm-hmm.
Our younger daughter, who was a newborn, had no interest in it, and I don't think she's even finished the book.
Wow, that's
You know,
interesting. What do you
I,
make of that?
my interpretation is that she really kind of doesn't want to rock the boat. She knows who her family is. She knows who her parents are. She knows the general outline of the story. And I think that's probably enough for
Enough
her.
for her.
There's been this reluctance. I mean, I'm telling you, there's been this reluctance over the years. It's me who is trying to tell her more, and she kind of doesn't really want to hear it.
Well, and maybe it's that she doesn't have as much to reconcile.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah.
but she came to because she's living on campus, at
You're
a
all
university.
you're all she's ever known, and
Yes, yeah.
her biological parents are just like theoretical in a way that for your older daughter they're not, if that makes sense.
Right.
They're real.
Right. And so there, she came to one of my talks while she was still living with us. It was the end of her because last year she was graduating from high school, so she was still living with us. And whereas she moved to campus, over the summer, so she came to one of my talks, and it was, she enjoyed it, but I don't. It's just a very, very different reaction. I know that if they follow my talks, they listen to them, they sometimes we talk about it, but they have very different reactions to them.
That's really interesting. And they seem, at least from what I read, and then, what reading about some of the conversations that you've had since publishing the book, they seem to be doing so well. I wanted to ask you, what are your hopes and your dreams for your girls and for other kids who are in the foster system right now or in bad homes? What kinds of hopes and dreams do you have for them?
I think that there should not be a foster care system. I mean, it exists. It's unfortunate. It's really tragic that it exists. Because I do believe that every child needs a family, needs a home. So from my end, I believe that the processes of reunification / versus adoption should be greatly expedited because a child needs a home. So I think that's where I come from. Okay, the child needs a home, and I also believe that any responsible adult could raise a child. And in my personal history, it was my grandparents who gave me a primary home in my childhood. It was not my parents, but it was my grandparents who raised me. So, and now having been a parent, I believe that if you are a responsible adult, you can raise a child. So, yeah.
Do you feel like part of the reason why the foster care system is so large and so prevalent is because we're so focused on reunification?
I think so, and I think I looked at it historically. I wanted to see where all these adoption laws actually originate, and I found that the very first state to pass an adoption statute was Massachusetts, which is our most liberal state. It was back in the early 1850s, and basically this set the whole precedent of treating a child as property of their parents. And so basically you detain and you dispose of the child the same way you would detain and dispose of a property. And it was interesting because they started and then other states began to replicate the process. And so now it's sort of taken for granted that that's how things are. Well, that's not the only things. That's not the only way things could be. And just to kind of to go back to 1850s, remember who else was property at that time?
Yes, African American,
but also the whites,
women.
Yes, that's it. All right,
right.
In 1850s. So basically, this whole idea that all of this, as well as just the children, the wives and the children were the property. So it's to me, it's like, wait a minute, but and like if somebody would ask me, what would you imagine to be an alternative? Well, how about a panel of experts? I don't know. Deciding what's the best for the child.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe there could be some other alternatives. They're not at play. They're not on
the table.
So what we're dealing with the system, which is basically, okay, are we returning the property back to the owners or not? And that's
Right.
that's
It's
not
based on
how
that.
it should be. That's not how it should be.
It's based on that old system. Wow.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
never even really thought about it. It's a system in a time where we really did di- dispose of people,
Yeah,
you
and
know?
Jason, yeah, we did dispose of people. Mhm.
Yeah.
In many ways than one,
Many
more ways than
ways.
one. But
Natives, wives, children who were mentally ill, African Americans. There's an assortment. And I think there's
Native
something
American children, the way they were
Native
taken out of
American
their
children,
families and put, yeah,
boarding schools. Yeah.
yeah.
I think there's something profound about the point that we're actually operating in 2025 in a system that was designed for a time where we looked at
That's
natives as subhuman, women as not equal, and African Americans as disposable property. I mean, you would think we would have improved that system or come up with a better way.
if you know anything about American history, you can see how accidental decisions become sort of long-term assumptions over time.
Yes, yes.
And it's exactly because I'm an immigrant gay uh, person coming into a system which was not designed for me or by me, but I'm talking about the LGBTQ
Hmm.
case, that I'm
Hmm.
beginning to query the system, asking, well, why do you assume? Why do you assume that things should be the way they are?
Mm.
Because I'm an outsider stepping into it and looking at it critically. That, wait a minute, why do you assume that children must be reunified with their biological parents no matter what? It's not no matter what.
Right.
I mean, you do this because you're coming from the perspective of the parent, not from the perspective of the child.
And that's an interesting point to me too. As somebody who's on your end, you're both Jewish and you are a gay man, and you said you're a child of the '90s. You grew up in a time where you were surrounded by people who were making assumptions um, about you, probably for an assortment of different reasons. But
Mhm.
being a gay man, during that time, and I think people have a hard time kind of reflecting and
Through the
remembering.
pre-equality times.
Yeah, yeah. This and the level of stereotypes that existed. That was a time where people that I find reasonable right now would have argued to me straight face that gay men should not be able to adopt children
Yeah.
because of the bad effects on the children, or blah 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 blah, or fill in the blank.
It was
Uh,
it was also what was also interesting was exactly that time, late 1990s, early 2000s, when states, and not all, some states began to open their foster care systems to, gay individuals and couples, not because they're all in favor of LGBTQ rights. Oh no, it's just there were too many children that did not have homes. They just
yeah.
couldn't find enough homes to place the children, and they've suddenly realized that, wait a minute, yeah, we're prejudiced, but there are these adults who seem to be taking good care of themselves and have income and homes, and they could take these children. So it was very much under the radar.
So interestingly, during that time, so I went to college in the late, or no, the mid '90s, and my associate dean, one of the associate deans or assistant deans at University of Maryland College of Journalism, a guy named Greg Stewart, like wonderful man, great guy, and he was married to his husband Jake, and they adopted a black child named David,
Mm.
um, who could not have had more loving parents. And it was just very interesting to watch that in a university setting, right? The University of Maryland is a, very, very focused on diversity, inclusion, culture, and then to step out of that into the real world and see how much prejudice still existed when I got out of that environment. It was very striking to me. It was remarkable, but it left an indelible mark on me. To not just about gay men, not just about the power of someone I think of the love of my parents, and there's always a part of you in the back of your mind that's like, well, they love me because they're my own. But there's something so powerful and beautiful about seeing someone love someone
Mm.
who's not their biological offspring so much. That tells me something more about our power and our ability to love, that it's not.
And to attach.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And Jonathan sometimes says that, and knowing fully well that our younger daughter, we're not her biological parents, but she grew up on his chest, literally. Like, he would be walking around, unloading the dishwasher, writing whatever, signing bills, and she would be curled up on his chest, like that's. So he feels that's sort of like almost a biological connection to her, and
Yeah.
I see this the connection between them is just so amazing. Yeah.
It makes you sort of
What's interesting,
reconsider.
you're
Yeah.
describing your experience at the University of Maryland. You have to realize that if you roll back a couple of decades, that gay man might not have been hired at the University of Maryland.
Oh, absolutely. Or run out.
That
Yeah.
a gay man is incapable of being, an educator and being exposed to college students. That would. So the thing is, society changes, right? So on one hand, the society changes, and the realities of law begin to catch up with it. On the other hand, we as a community, as the LGBT community, have been fighting to gain the rights that we gained. The time when our adoption story was taking place in the early 2000s was really the transformative time, transitional times, when all across the country, including California, we're fighting for equal rights. So just to put it in perspective, during that time, we were two single individuals raising two related children. We finalized the adoptions as two single individuals.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And I do describe it, the situation when I went in to file for the Social Security number for our older daughter, and I was told, well, we only have father and mother. Which one are you going to be? You can apply for it as just one father and no mother, or will one of you will have to be the mother? I said, I'll be the mother. The mother, the other parent all along. So all of this was real. But the thing is, it was also the time when, because of this whole, focus on save the children, which became the sort of the rallying cry for people who were against, same-sex marriage,
Right.
that same-sex, where the gay families sort of came out of the underground into the spotlight. And so we were very much part of that struggle, very much and I do describe it in the book as well, what we did in order to help as much as we could process to move forward. So it was interesting times, those late 1990s, early 2000s, late 2000s. Yep.
An inspiring journey, not just the story of adoption, but your life, your family history. I thoroughly enjoyed both this conversation, but also researching and reading about you and reading the book. I feel like there are a lot of good lessons for all of us. And I want to give you a chance before we wrap up to just see, in thinking about, the through line for me within this story, with your relationship with Jonathan, with navigating the system, with your love for the girls. When I think about it all, and I think about how careful you guys were with all of it and how hard you worked and how much love was involved, I'm just left with jumping back to something that I had said before, but this notion of like how that love fueled such resilience through some really dark and hard times. And I'm just wondering if you had any closing thoughts for people who are sort of, whether it's in adoption or they are the kid who's in a bad home or potentially being adopted, whether you just had any closing thoughts for people when it comes to that idea of holding on to the hope.
Well, you mentioned the partner, so probably I will just reiterate my point that whatever relationship you're in, whatever the family that you have made, built, remember to take care of your partner, because the nucleus of your family is the two of you. If you are in a couple, that's where it begins. If you're considering adopting, I would say, and dealing with the foster care system, first of all, I don't want my book to to scare you. There are many stories where the adoptions were relatively painless and fast. And so my book is sort of exposing the situation where things go wrong, where they go in a way that shouldn't have gone. So I would say just expect the unexpected, because the system is very complex, and you need to learn about the system and arm yourself with resources, with knowledge.
Yeah.
And when it comes to children, one thing that I learned is to resist projecting my expectations into my child, because basically, and I think it probably applies to both biological and adopted children, is that we know who we are, and we tend to expect them to be sort of the continuation of who we are. If you're a reader or an athlete or a mathematician, you expect your children to be like that. But the thing is, they are who they are. And so it's important to pay attention to that and let go of preconceptions and build on their natural strengths. And when you finally, I would say that you mentioned love. I think it is probably the most important thing, is for the child to know that they are loved, that they're wanted, that they're loved, and that they're appreciated, and that they're committed to. They're committed.
Yeah, you're right. It's like having, back to what you said in the beginning about a solid foundation. Like, there's nothing more important for a child so they can run and so they can jump, is to feel like the ground underneath them is steady, and that love is always. Well, thank you very much, Lane. I really appreciate the conversation. Good luck with your journey, which I know you never get to stop being a parent. So,
yeah. You know what? They're always one step ahead of you.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Catch up. Like, just we just barely sort of got through. Like, okay, we learn how to manage preteens. Now they're teens. We just survived our daughters' adolescence. They're now young women. So, like, learning.
All right, Lane, you take care. Thanks for joining us for this conversation. If you'd like to join us for more discussions with me and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, you can also join us on our Patreon, where you can also get early and ad-free episodes. You can find us there at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you all again in a few days.